Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I'm so pleased to welcome you to a two-week series. We have two very distinguished guests that are most qualified to deal with their work, and we're excited to invite them here to our program from Northern California. First of all, we have Ryan Miller, who is one of the producers at an organization called The Working Group, and next to her is Patrice O'Neill, who is also a producer. They have done two documentaries that have received national and international attention. The first one was in 1995, and it was called Not in Our Town. Originally, the story was about Billings, Montana, and it's been expanded into some other communities and had some additions to it. The second documentary aired most recently on PBS nationally through Point of View, and it's called The Fire Next Time. Today's program is about Not in Our Town, and then next week we'll deal with The Fire Next Time. Before we interview our wonderful guest and have our panel here, Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and Erna Reinhardt, who's the director of public relations at North Idaho College, we thought it would be helpful to you to let you view 4 minutes from this 60-minute documentary. That it's a 60-minute program. Now we'll do that at this time.
Once I could sort of realize that fear is exactly what they had in mind for me, you know, if they want me to be silent, then that's not going to happen.
Could I leave a message for her?
The Human Rights Coalition gathered over 6,000 signatures and over 100 resolutions from local groups against the hate activity in Billings. But the harassment continued. In September, graves in the Jewish cemetery were desecrated and overturned.
That sent a very clear message to every Jewish person in Billings that you all are our targets.
Uri Barnea is director of the symphony. He grew up in Israel with his parents, who escaped Nazi Germany. Like other Jews in Billings, Uri Barnea was also a target. In early December, a section of cinder block crashed through a window in the Schnitzer family home. 6-year-old Isaac Schnitzer had placed a menorah in his window for Hanukkah, the Jewish celebration of freedom from religious persecution. The cinder block landed on Isaac's bed. Luckily, he wasn't in it. Tammy Schnitzer came home from a meeting to find her husband Brian in Isaac's bedroom.
Brian was in this very cold children's bedroom, rocking in a chair with no sheets, and the room is vacuumed, crying. An emergency room physician who's seen some horrible things, who's been under control for many, many years, suddenly broken down.
That night, the Schnitzers stayed awake, talking about how best to protect their family.
I grew up in a world where it probably was not unusual for a black family to go to bed with their children sleeping under their bed because something might come through their window. It became very frightening to realize that we did not have the ability to protect our home and our children, that perhaps the community could help protect our children.
I remember discussing it with the publisher of the Gazette the next morning after this had happened and saying that please make this front page news because I want people to understand what it's like to be Jewish.
Religious and community leaders wondered how to help the town understand what it was like to be persecuted.
I guess it was a question of looking for an image that kind of put this together.
Gary Sve, an editor at the Billings Gazette, recalls how the Danish king used a symbol to thwart the Nazis in World War II.
At least to me, was during the Second World War, the Danish king is reputed to have come out after the Jewish community there was forced to wear stars by the Nazi occupiers, that he was reported to have come out with a yellow star too.
In the spirit of the Danish king, the newspaper printed a full-page menorah for townspeople to tear out and hang in their windows. On December 2nd, 1993, someone twisted by hate threw a brick through the window of the home of one of our neighbors. Today, members of religious faiths throughout Billings are joining together to ask residents to display the menorah as a symbol of something else, our determination to live together in harmony and our dedication to the principle of religious liberty embodied in the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America.
The good thing about this town is that everybody said that one day, let's get together. So what we're going to do is put menorahs in our windows, and pretty soon everybody we knew had one.
It's a small excerpt from this really dramatic documentary about how a community did rally against hate. And with that, now we'll interview our two producers about Not in Our Town, and we will start with Janelle Burke.
In order to provide our viewers with some background about what are these very visible examples of what people can do and what happens to people and what people can do. Patrice, can you tell us what is the working group and sort of how is it formed?
We're a media production company. We focus on three areas: the workplace, race and the battle against intolerance, and building democracy and citizen participation. But mostly we try to do television that makes people talk to each other. And I think what distinguishes us from other production companies is that we don't just do media, put it out there, and hope that someone will watch it on television. What we learned from Not in Our Town, this film that we did 10 years ago, is that there's incredible power if you not only do a television program, but intentionally do a program that encourages dialogue and encourages people to examine their own community and talk to each other about what's going on. And that's an incredible gift to us and a lesson that we learned from watching the response to Not in Our Town and to the story of Billings in communities across the country.
Now, Ryan, maybe people don't understand, what do producers do? We've always heard this, that so-and-so is a producer. What do producers do?
Well, it varies depending on if you're a documentary producer or a feature producer. Unlike producers in Hollywood, we don't just go out and raise the money. And I mean, their roles are different. But in documentary, and especially in a small company like ours, you pretty much do everything. But the parts that are really fun and that we get to do is you get to decide what stories you want to do. In this case, we had read the story of what happened in Billings, Montana in a New York Times magazine story. And we just were blown away by it, by many people who read it and thought, we have to do this story. And we happened to have a show at the time that needed one more really great story. So you find the story, and then in many cases, when we're doing a story, you're trying to find the characters. They're people, but they become characters to us. You find those people who can tell the story in a way that will move the viewer. So in this case, we already had the characters pretty much lined up, but then you do a lot of phone calls, we're not able to necessarily go into the field all the time, so you do a lot of it by phone, and then you get to go out on location, which is one of the best parts of our job, is going out and meeting people and hearing people's stories, expanding our lives in amazing ways. And then you come back and work with the editor and put it all together and write the script and rewrite the script and re-edit and re-edit. And
that's what a producer does.
Welcome to the show, both of you. I want to start with Patrice and have you set the stage for our viewers and just summarize some of the key things that are in the documentary and share with us the story of what was happening in Billings that led up to the documentary.
The story takes place over about a year's period of time in Billings. And there had been, as you know, if you live in Coeur d'Alene, the white supremacist movement had declared the Northwest to be their homeland. And Billings was one of the larger towns that started experiencing a wave of leafleting by the KKK, some attacks on African Americans, gay people. It started with the attacks on the Jewish cemetery. Then there was a black church that skinheads would attend, and it was a very small congregation. People were very intimidated, and people from all of the churches in Billings started going to that church so people would feel secure. Then there was an attack on a Native American woman's home. There were swastikas, and there was, oddly enough, graffiti that said, "Go back to where you came from," which was puzzling. But then the Human Rights Network there decided to ask the Painters Union if they would come over and paint out the house. And the 30 members of the Painters Union came out, but then 100 neighbors came out and watched them paint the house, which was pretty remarkable. I guess the culminating event you saw part of in the story was there was an attack on a Jewish family's home. A little boy had placed a menorah in his window for Hanukkah, and a brick was thrown through the window. And then people started making handmade menorahs and putting it up in their windows. And the newspaper, the local newspaper, finally printed a full-page menorah, and people all over the community decided to put menorahs in their windows. And that year, 10,000 people put menorahs in their windows in Billings, Montana. And it's a story that's been told and retold around the country, and it is a very, very powerful story about how a community can act together in even small ways and send a very large message.
Excellent. Ryan, share with our viewers maybe a favorite segment of either the documentary or one of your favorite persons maybe that inspired you when you made the film.
Well, I think Patrice mentioned the painters, and when we first went to do the documentary, we landed in Billings, and our first interview was with the painters, and there's one, Gary Modi, who talks about, he says he's painting, and he talks about how, he says, I'm just one of those people who I'd always hear about things and I'd feel bad about it, but I never did much about anything. And so I really felt good to be able to go out there and paint out the house. And I think that expresses for all of us a feeling that we all have. You feel helpless, you read something in the paper, or you don't read about it, which is even worse. Things happen all the time that we don't even hear about. But you always would like to be able to do something, but you feel either afraid or don't know what to do. And that's what we have found has been the blessing of this film to our company and to us personally, to see how people can see this film, see these small things, like putting the menorah in the newspaper. That has been repeated in towns across America where things have happened. In Sacramento, 3 synagogues were burned, firebombed in one night. In the next 2 days, the community came together. The local newspaper came up with a sign, the Jewish sign symbol for life, and it was up in Sacramento in windows across the neighborhood. And it was something very simple but very strong and basic that people could do.
Excellent.
I'm going to ask our wonderful staff to put up your website or how you can be contacted, because I do know that, Ryan, you do show these around the country and even other countries. And when they put these up here so you could be contacted, tell us some of the places that you have been as a group, the working group, to talk to communities and show films.
Oh. Well, there are 5 Not in Our Town cities in Illinois. There are just communities all over. I think just since January, we've been joined by Fort Collins, Colorado, Howell, Michigan, Fremont, California. They've become Not in Our Town communities, and people identify as Not in Our Town communities. And sometimes it's in response to something that happens and an incident. I guess the more powerful stories are when communities decide they want to take preventative action, that they want to really do something before it happens. And that really is how the Not in Our Town movement began. I think the first, after we did the first program with Not in Our Town, we got a call from Bloomington, Illinois, and they'd had a whole series of events. They had something in the high school, they had something in the library, they had a town hall meeting. And 6 months later, we got a call, and I don't know if you're able to see this, but Ryan has one of these buttons on, and Bloomington, Illinois called us up and said, we'd like to order 2,000 Not in Our Town buttons. And we said, well, we really don't do this anymore. We're a production company, and we don't really have any more buttons. They said, you don't understand, we have to have these buttons now. Because there are churches burning in the South, and we want to make sure that there are no churches that burn in Bloomington, Illinois. So we're going to have a march from the courthouse to one of the African American churches in our community, and we need the buttons for our march. So people in Bloomington, we decided, well, maybe we better go film this. And that's how we began Not in Our Town, too, and that's how, you know, we continued to document these stories of how communities were using the stories of Billings.
And you even been to Europe with it?
Yes, we were invited to go to the Czech Republic after it was, had become a fairly new country, and they were struggling. It was very interesting for us to be invited with this show because they were looking at it from a little different angle. I mean, they do, as you all probably know, the European communities are having trouble now with discrimination and some hate violence. But in this particular case, they were looking at it, as Tony said, the whole issue of bringing communities together, and they were trying to teach themselves in their communities how to participate in civic life, because it was a country that was used to sort of being maybe forced to be involved in certain things, but weren't really used to just on their own being motivated to take action and to operate in democratic ways as a community. So that was just a wonderful experience for us to go there.
And I'm wearing one of the pins today, too, and they're just really, really powerful and lovely pins. Before I go back to the panel, Patrice, in speaking at North Idaho College, and you're here to do 3 programs at North Idaho College, and I was really impressed with the students in both your dialogues with the students today. You posed 3 questions to the students, and I think our viewers would like to hear those, and they can think about them and in relation to their own community. If you would do that, please.
Well, one of the things I think about a lot, and we try to analyze, and I ask people, why do you think people continue to use this story? What is it about Billings? What is it about those actions, those seemingly simple actions in Billings that make people around the country want to take action in their own community? The other question I asked is, Gary Svee, the editor of the Billings Gazette, says that what would have happened in Nazi Germany if people had taken action? I think, how did this happen? That's a question that should haunt all of us. And one of the things I thought about is, here we are, particularly with the students now, they're 2 generations removed from World War II now. And is that a question that haunts them in the way it haunted our parents' generation? And certainly for me, it's a question that haunts me, that because my father was in World War II, and I think about it quite a bit. And the other question is, there's a congregational minister in the film, and he talks about an Iroquois concept. He says that there are benevolent forces in us that need to come out, and if they don't come out, we get sick. And I was wondering if people feel that, if they have that sensation, if they feel that there's great goodness in us, and if it doesn't come out, what happens to us, and how does that manifest itself?
Very important questions. Janelle Burke.
My first question is going to be for Ryan, and then I'll follow up with Patrice. But Ryan, did you find that people were willing to talk to you on a regular basis, and how did you get the names of the people that you really wanted to talk to?
For this particular program, we got most of the names from the original article, and then by calling in and doing interviews, we got more, and they were so willing to talk to us. It was one of those experiences where you sort of just leap, not knowing where you're going to land and not having maybe the resources to do it, but you go, and from the first interview, as I explained before, with the painter, to the second, third, fourth, with all the wonderful people you'll see in the film, every single person was just so inspiring and so articulate and so thoughtful. This group, that had been dealing with these issues, like the group that we've met here in Coeur d'Alene, the Kootenai County Task Force, was just so very thoughtful and considerate of the community that they were dealing with and asking them to do these things. But just in general, in our work, in all of our issues, not just the hate crime, but our work shows too, it's amazing how open people are and how willing they are to invite you into their home, into their workplace, and tell you their stories. And I think partly it's because in one of our missions, I think partly it's because we're talking to people who don't often get asked, whose stories are not often told on TV and on national TV. And that's why it's always been important for us to be on a national network and to be in prime time when we can.
So, Patrice, do you prompt your people that you're going to interview? In other words, do you have a little interview with them beforehand, and then you talk to them on the film, or how do you work that?
Well, we usually do pre-interviews. It depends on who it is. Sometimes, we'll team tag. Sometimes Ryan will do the pre-interview. That way, I'll know exactly what the good stories are, but it'll be fresh because they're telling it to me then. So, and vice versa. We'll switch off sometimes in that way. But you like to get a sense of what kind of stories people will tell, but then try to make it new again so that it's new for the audience as well.
Erna Reinhardt.
I have two questions, so I'll start the first one with Patrice. One of the things that I think since Coeur d'Alene has gone through this ourselves, how important it is that different aspects of the community respond to the hate, and share with us how that took place in Billings, that it wasn't just the religious community, but it was several different groups that got involved. I think that's really important that the whole community speak up. So share with us that, please.
Well, we call that the Not in Our Town model, and as Ryan said, I think we've been so impressed about how that model has been implemented here in Kootenai County, where you have not just, the change in the community action doesn't just come from the mayor or the city council. It's a whole variety of people acting together. It's civic leaders, it's educational leaders, it's activist organizations. It is the local clergy from a variety of perspectives. It's the newspaper, the local newspaper taking part in this. And then it's ordinary citizens being able to see themselves in the action somewhere where they're not just, going to forums where everybody else gets to talk, but they can participate as well. That's really the Not in Our Town model, and I think that's the strength of it and why people around the country have grabbed onto this story, because they can see themselves in the story. They see, that's me, that could be me, I can relate to the police chief. I neglected law enforcement. It was very important that law enforcement become involved as well.
And then Ryan, I just want to follow up with, not only does the documentary tell the story, but it sounds like the other goal that your company has is that dialogue that occurs after the viewing, that you don't just watch the movie, get up and leave, but that there's a whole other component. And share with us, I think someone today said that you were hoping that maybe 10 town hall meetings would occur, and it has gone way beyond that. So
yes.
Share that with us.
Well, our company, we were taught that lesson by the audience. We were a company that was used to producing a monthly show, and we'd produce it, and we'd send it up to the satellite, and then we'd start on the next one. And then when we had the chance to do Not in Our Town as a complete special, we decided to do a public screening, because it's not something we got to do often, and we did this public screening up in Northern California, and afterwards, people just sat there. They weren't leaving. They wanted to talk about it. And we thought, well, this is and I mean, it was just incredible. It was amazing. This one of the audience members was this very well-dressed woman. She stands up. She was an older woman, and she stands up, and she has a bit of an accent. You can tell some kind of European accent. And she said, I want to thank the producers of this show. I want to thank the people of Billings, Montana, and I want to thank all of you here for this, because if something like this had happened in my town where I grew up, maybe I wouldn't have had to go through the concentration camp.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So the intent was not for the dialogue.
We didn't really, I mean, we always intended for our shows to do dialogue, but we hadn't built that component in so purposefully. And I do want to follow up on what Tony said about the website. I think just so everybody knows, there's all kinds of information there. There's viewing guides, curriculum guides, there's little videos, there's press releases. There's just everything that anybody needs to have to do a Not in Our Town campaign. Of course, you know, do it your own way because that always adds to it. But and all most PBS programs now have that, so please take advantage of those resources.
Like the point of view has been really great about dealing with a lot of different issues. Another component that's really important in your work, and what we've been talking about mostly today, is once those terrible incidents take place, it's so important for the community to rally behind and be allies to the victims and send a message to the hate groups, you're not welcome here and we won't stand silently by. But there are things that communities can do before incidents, being proactive, and so that increases chances that individuals who are peddling hate won't come to the community or won't do it in the community. Share with us a little bit, both of you, what communities can do even in times when they're not facing those particular incidents.
Well, again, we'll go back to a few of the places in Illinois. Rockford, Illinois, decided that they were going to do a 4-month Not in Our Town campaign, and it originated in the Parks Department. And so people there, they had a whole variety of things that they would do, but it sort of was, the center of the campaign was take the pledge against racism. And school children, civic leaders, all kinds of people were asked to take the pledge. And it was difficult. It was challenging. You'd have to look at it and think, what does this mean? What does this mean? How am I going to react when someone makes a racist joke? Am I going to respond? Because in the pledge, it asks you to do that. And it was very thought-provoking, and it was part of what they did for 4 months. They had events in the library, they had screenings, they had events in the schools, and it culminated in a march through downtown and a play that the students wrote in the local junior high school that was very, very moving about stereotypes and what they meant. So that town was really trying to take an effort to say, what does it mean to say not in our town? What does it mean in our community? Let's look at
an ongoing process.
Right.
We're out of time, but good news is we'll have you back next week to look at your other film, The Fire Next Time. And I would just add one footnote also. Another great resource in many communities are colleges and universities, and they have a lot of resources to be helpful in these crusades and these campaigns. We want to thank both of you on behalf of the panel and the staff. It's been really informative today, and we look forward to having you back again next week. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us again next week when we will talk with our two guests about their documentary called The Fire Next Time. I think you'll find it most stimulating and helpful to you. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.